I definitely trust Alex Norris, a man who I have worked with at the Home Office for some time. I know this man, and I believe I believe not just that he is a good task and finish minister, but also that his morality is absolutely in the right place. And I would say the same for Andy Burnham. But of course, the proof of the pudding is always in the eating.
The political problem facing Andy Burnham on prisons is how to ease the strain on a creaking prison system without releasing dangerous criminals into the community. Keir Starmer's Sentencing Act allowed most offenders on fixed terms to leave jail after serving a third of a sentence. That did include offenders who had committed crimes like rape, grooming and child sexual assault. Many victims of those crimes felt bitterly let down by the proposals, and the government has this morning revised them. Someone who spent her whole political life fighting for the rights of victims of crime is Jess Phillips. She resigned as Safeguarding Minister in May, saying in her resignation letter that opportunities for progress on violence against women and girls had stalled and been delayed. She joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Kate.
In your view, Jess Phillips, do these changes that we've heard from Andy Burnham and Alex Norris, the Justice Secretary, do they go far enough?
Look, what they've announced today is a step in the right direction with regard to the exemptions on sexual crimes, but actually much more fundamentally, and one of the things they have announced today is an extra £10 million to go into victim services, and I will be interested to see what that actually looks like. But there is a much more fundamental review that needs to be done about how we risk assess who should go to prison and then who may be eligible for release. And that is much more, it's much less a sort of decision on the basis of, quite understandable backlash from victims about who gets exempted, but really about how our probation system works with our police system and works with our victims support systems. And that is the work that I really hope, and have been talking to the ministers involved, will be undertaken before October, so that we can be assured that those who are being released early from prison, not obviously they've exempted the sexual crimes, but in cases of domestic abuse, that they are really, that it is safe to do that, and there is a safe system to do it.
Well, let's take those two things in turn, because I think they are really interesting. On the promise of the extra money and the extra support for those victims and survivors, the Prime Minister seems to be saying more tagging, more oversight. He's talking about curfews and also location-based restrictions, including community events, and a helpline. Now, we've gone round the houses on the helpline before. I know that it hadn't been started when I last asked a minister about it. Do you have faith in those measures that are being suggested?
Look, I have faith that the right people are in the room asking for the right things. So the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, the Victims Commissioner, and I had started a working group about exactly what changes would need to be made. And I don't have any doubt that the brand new shiny Justice Ministers and Secretary of State and Prime Minister, frankly, are listening to those calls. So look, if all of those things come off and they're not just words written on paper, there's quite especially when there's a crisis, and this has been a political as well as a safety crisis, it's quite easy to write things down or put things in press releases. It's the actual hard yards of making sure that a judge who presides over a case, a domestic abuse case, for example, or a sexual violence case, has all of the information about the risk of that offender. Now, what we saw in the Fordingbridge rape cases, for example, was that the judge who decided to not sentence to incarceration the young men involved in those sexual crimes, what we find out later is that they didn't have all of the information about their previous or previously known offending history, conviction or otherwise. And in cases of domestic and sexual abuse, the vast majority of prior activity that would be known wouldn't be convicted necessarily. So I need to feel really assured. And look, I have no doubt that Alex Norris, the Secretary of State for Justice, is going to do this, that all of the information about who gets released is properly taken account of.
Is the probation service good enough to be able to handle what is being asked of it now?
Currently, at the moment, I would say, well, look, there has been a huge investment. I think £700 million has gone into probation. I am yet to know exactly how much of that has gone into, for example, women's safety officers or victim liaison officers, to make sure that victims can be properly cared for, make sure that they have all the multi-agency things in place, and, for example, like stuff done to their homes to make them safer, sanctuary schemes we talk about in domestic abuse, for example. That I'm yet to know how much of that new investment has gone into that. But the delay that Andy Burnham has called for in stopping this till October means that all of these questions can be properly, the tyres can be properly kicked. But I would be lying if I would sit here and say that I think that the probation service currently has all of the evidence-based tools to deal with domestic and sexual abuse in the community, and that community sentences are where I would want them to be. And so that all needs to be looked at in this moratorium time.
And of course, those domestic abusers are not included in this exemption. So those perpetrators will still be eligible for earlier release than had been expected under this early release scheme. Is that the right decision?
Well, look, the issue with domestic abuse crimes in our country is the volume. The volume of such crimes is so huge. It is 20% of all call-outs to all police forces in our country. And so when you are looking at a system that relies on numbers, I can totally understand. Now, I actually think look, the vast majority of domestic abuse cases are under 12 months anyway, and they're charged on things like common assault rather than the only real domestic abuse related crime is coercive and controlling behaviour. And I actually, whilst of course I would like to see coercive and controlling behaviour exempted, I fought for it to be exempted in the earlier iteration of the release. That there is much more that can be done in the risk management space and working with victims through multi-agency systems being set up that actually can make this considerably better without it falling into the exemptions. But the numbers just would never add up, and that is because so many women are abused. And the vast majority of domestic abusers in our country, we shouldn't be worried that they're being early released. What we should be worried about is they're never seeing the inside of a police station or certainly or a courtroom, and definitely very rarely a prison. So there are already millions of domestic abusers within our community, and actually we need to look at that system in the whole.
Jess, can I ask you finally, it sounds like you're willing to give Andy Burnham and Alex Norris and other ministers the benefit of the doubt for now. Is there a point at which you would review that? Because you have faith clearly in their intentions, but it will be in the delivery of this. Is there a point at which you need to see action?
Oh, my loyalty is only to the victims of violence against women and girls in our country. It doesn't rely on badges. It doesn't rely on political persuasion. I once said I'd dance with the devil to make women and children safer. But I definitely trust Alex Norris, a man who I have worked with at the Home Office for some time. I know this man, and I believe I believe not just that he is a good task and finish minister, but also that his morality is absolutely in the right place, and I would say the same for Andy Burnham. But of course, the proof of the pudding is always in the eating, and nobody in government would expect me to give anybody a light pass on this sort of thing.
Jess Phillips, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That is Jess Phillips, the former safeguarding minister. I mean,
one of the political problems that they're facing is they did this review in order to look into the concerns that two people who were involved in the killing of PC Andrew Harper were going to be released early. And as we were told this morning, they're going to still be released early. Now, they might say, and I think that Alex Norris said this to us, that they've weighed up all the options. This is the least worst option. And the question is whether Jess Phillips is going to give them a chance and say, we accept that. Will the public give them the chance to say that? We've heard the Tories saying it's all your fault, which I think doesn't necessarily help them a lot, because a lot of the problem is a systemic one that they've been involved in themselves. How much will the public say, we recognise it's a difficult position, this is the best you can do. Or the public say, we've got too many foreign criminals, why don't you use military camps, why don't you keep people in prison, lock them up more to a cell?
Yeah.
You know, I wonder how open-minded the public are going to be about this, even if you accept they're doing their best endeavour.